Hi, it's Dennis Daly. Recently, you and I went across country on the back road, starting in Washington, D.C., going to Wheeling, West Virginia, then to my hometown in Indiana, on into the Ozarks, from there a long day and a half in Kansas, and then up into Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah, and finally down to Reno, and then to San Francisco. And many times along the way, the fascinating thing I found were the bridges. So let's go back and revisit some of them. Well, we made it to the old National Road. What little you can see of it now. This was where it entered Frederick, Maryland, and behind me years ago was a classic stone bridge across the Monocacy River. On our trip across the Maryland Panhandle, we will begin to see what infrastructure was like in the early 1800s. Some of the greatest engineering talents were employed in building the old National Road, and among the great achievements were bridges. And the first one we see is the Wilson Bridge. And the Wilson Bridge has become a kind of poster boy for the infrastructure of the old National Road, built in the early part of the 1800s. But another bridge over the Castleman River is even older and more historic. This is a pretty amazing bridge. It's here in Grantsville, Maryland, over the Castleman River. It was the longest arch in the world at one time. It carried hundreds of thousands of wagons, and one of the really neat things is from the railing of this bridge, you can see two newer generations of highway making. The 1940s bridge, and way behind that, the Interstate Bridge. Both are really ugly compared to this arch. That's a really neat bridge on US 40 across the Youghiogheny River here in Pennsylvania. There's a dam up there that forms a lake that's great for recreation. This is a rather new bridge. I remember the older one. It was narrow. My dad hated it. But before either one of these bridges, there was one down there, an early bridge. Another one of those early pieces of infrastructure on the old National Road. But you can only see it now when the lake is nearly empty. You see, before the reservoir was built, there was a great bridge over the Youghiogheny River and a little town that got submerged eventually. But now, when the lake is at its lowest, you can see the remnants of the bridge, a ghost from another time. And it's a little hard to understand just how important this pioneering suspension bridge here at Wheeling was, not only to the infrastructure of the old National Road, but to the art of bridge building, beautifully preserved today, connecting Wheeling to a part of Wheeling that's on an island. You see this beautiful bridge up here? It's the Highway 40 bridge here in Blaine, Ohio. But behind me is the classic brick-covered S bridge, the Blaine Bridge, that was the hallmark of this part of the old National Road. It became the centerpiece of a fabulous celebration of highways and history here in the state of Ohio. And they did a wonderful job preserving it. And it was used as the symbol of Ohio's bicentennial celebration. It's a preserved S bridge, and Ohio is a museum of S bridges. And this piece of infrastructure is yet another bridge. It's a bridge over Peters Creek. And here it is on the old National Road. It's an S bridge. Now let me explain this. Arch bridges couldn't span very much. If you came to a river or creek diagonally, why not cross it this way? And that's what these old S bridges do. Preserved for posterity, re-bricked. Just think of all the traffic that went across here when this was still US 40. But you have to know where to look to find the old artifacts. And of course, you can't have river bottoms without a river. And this is the gorgeous old bridge on Highway 50 from years ago. When I was a kid growing up in the area, it was one of my favorite places, particularly at night in springtime. But it's a great example of the old truss bridges that made early highways possible. And this is the beautiful Abraham Lincoln Bridge. This magnificent bridge was built in the 1930s as part of a Depression make-work project. It commemorates the event in 1830 when Abraham Lincoln's family moved to Illinois on the old bridge right here. But rather than take the beautiful Lincoln Bridge across the beautiful Wabash River, I thought we'd go 25 miles south and do a little history lesson. You see, the highways came after the railroads. And by that time, many of the railroads had changed their right-of-way or abandoned a bridge. Many of the early highway bridges in this country were built on railroad bridges. Pretty spectacular, isn't it? One lane, a wooden floor, and we're gonna drive across into Illinois. I know this bridge isn't going to fall down, but this is a lot creepier than I thought it would be. We're about to cross the Mississippi and join Route 66, and I want to show you a bridge that used to terrify my dad. And the reason my dad hated this bridge so much is that it has a curve in the middle of it. It is the Chain of Rocks Bridge, and we are now on one of the original alignments of Route 66. You can't drive across here anymore unless you've got a motorcycle, and just a few moments ago, a bunch of motorcyclists came through. It is one of America's most historic bridges, and it's beautifully preserved. And that curve in the middle, man, it was nuts. That 22-degree bend was necessitated because of the bridge's proximity to a water intake tower and the shipping industry's demands to not block the channel. And I might point out before we leave this spot that it was only about 2 miles north of here that Lewis and Clark and the Corps of Discovery got together before it went west. We made our way through East St. Louis, a city cut up with interstate highways, onto a ramp of a bridge to take us over into St. Louis. This is one of those sturdy old bridges, very reminiscent of that railroad bridge we used to cross the Wabash River. This is the old routing of Route 66, the bridge here at what is called Devil's Elbow, a sharp bend in the river. And during the past couple of years, this area saw its worst flooding ever. I would be standing in water right now if I were here then, and the bridge had to be put back together. This was a mess. And in many parts of the Ozarks, especially here on the Big Piney River, things can really get underwater. The bridge was in danger for a while, and several of the local businesses that relied on tourism had a hard time digging out. But I'll tell you, if you want to trace old 66, you have to come here. You have to get off the interstate onto the old road, onto the older road, and find Devil's Elbow. It's quite a place. Down a farm road that's got cattle on it. But I was told it would be worth it, that if we got this far off the beaten track and looked into the distance, we would begin to see something pretty spectacular. That's a neat old bridge, isn't it? It's called a through truss because the guts of it are on top the roadway. Anyway, a lot of people forget that, particularly in the 1800s, bridges like this were bought in kit form. And there were companies around the U.S. from which you could order a bridge of any size and have it delivered. And ironically, a lot of those 1800s do-it-yourself bridges are still being used today. Well, what do you know? Our journey is almost ended. And of course, behind me, the Golden Gate Bridge into San Francisco. It's a little foggy here, but it's almost always foggy part of the day in San Francisco. You know, it was only when I got back home off those lonely two-lane roads that I realized just how important the bridges were and how much a part of our story they became. I'm Dennis Daly.